Hello, everybody, and welcome to Answers for February 23rd. I'm Kevin Daly. Today's edition of Answers is going to focus on how to have a successful online PPT meeting in this age of the COVID-19 virus. There will be a school update and also some basic training on PPT meetings from Audra Talbot. As always, there will be time for questions and answers with participants. So get ready to hit that Q&A button or the chat button. Either way, your questions will come through to us. Answers is brought to you by PATH, Parent to Parent, Family Voices of Connecticut. This is a nonprofit organization which for more than 30 years has served the needs of Connecticut families of children with special health care needs. In front of you, you see a partial list of PATH's programs. It should be noted that all the programs and services that PATH offers are done at no cost to the families we serve. For more information about PATH, please visit our website at pathct.org. If you have questions about this email or comments, please contact me directly at this email address. And while you're online, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. Here's the fine print, folks. This webinar is not legal advice. It's not healthcare advice. It's not advice of any kind. It's about a search for answers so we can understand what's going on with our children's education in this age of COVID-19. And as always, this webinar is the property of PATH and should not be misused for any purpose without the written permission of PATH. Now, the school update. Since the first day of school this year, public schools have been educating America's children using 3 instructional models in response to the pandemic: full in-person learning, full remote learning, and hybrid learning, a combination of the 2. Families also have the option to opt out for full-time remote instruction. Also, in response to the pandemic, America's public schools have been opening and closing. Let's take a look. Currently, in 41 states, the decision to open and close schools is left up to local school districts. The state government provides guidelines and recommendations, but no mandates. Connecticut is one of those states, and it's been that way for a while. The state is asking school districts to plan for all students to return for full-time instruction in person in fall 2021, if the virus transmission rates permit. It's that way in our neighboring states too. School districts there decide how to open or close. And like Connecticut, their state governments are asking school districts to give in-person learning a priority. In these 4 states, in-person instruction is not allowed by state order. In California, schools are ordered closed in communities where the virus is spreading at a dangerously high rate. And right now, that's most of the state. And for that reason, most of the students in California right now are on full remote instruction. In Hawaii, where the entire state is one big school district, officials report that roughly 3/4 of their students are on full or hybrid instruction. The state has ordered schools closed in counties where virus transmission rates exceed standards that are set by the state. In these counties, schools must provide full remote instruction. In these 4 states, the state government has ordered school districts to make in-person instruction available either full-time or part-time. Texas is one of those states. In Texas, school districts must provide full-time in-person instruction for any family who wants it. Full remote instruction is still available too. However, school districts can order a student who is falling behind academically to return to in-person classes. In Iowa, school districts must provide full-time in-person instruction for families that want it. Families can still opt out for full remote instruction or for hybrid instruction. And in West Virginia, just one state, there's a combination. The state has ordered elementary and middle schools to be open full-time for in-person instruction. High schools can provide in-person instruction too, unless they're located in communities where the virus is spreading rapidly. Families in these areas can opt for full remote instruction if they choose. Put it all together, you get a very colorful map. However, the map is not as colorful as the map was in mid-November. Back then, most states were making decisions about opening and closings, at least more than there are now. And now more states are leaving the decision to open and close up to local school districts. Worthy of honorable mention are the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. In DC, where the schools have been closed for most of the academic year, in-person instruction is now available for families who choose that option. In Puerto Rico, where schools have been closed for nearly a year, schools will reopen for in-person instruction in March. And there was breaking news today from the U.S. Department of Education. Standardized testing for all students will be required before the end of the current school year. The intention is to use standardized testing to measure the effects of the pandemic on student progress. States will be permitted to request a waiver to be exempt for testing for at least the first year, but no additional information was released on assessing the progress of special education students. And folks, standardized tests aren't always the best way to measure the progress of our children. So right now there are many unanswered questions about how this directive will be carried out. Meanwhile, in Connecticut, according to the latest figures from the State Department of Education, about 56% of all school districts are using the full in-person learning model. About 38% of them are using the hybrid model, and about 6% are mostly remote. It's close to where we were back in mid-November, when about 53% of all school districts were full in-person, about 38 were using the hybrid model, and 9% were using the full remote model. The figures show that full remote instruction is down, and in-person instruction is on the rise. Well, what should be done next to reopen schools? What are the right moves to make? It's complicated. We don't even have a full year's experience with these matters. It's like driving a car, but the windshield is unclear, and all you have for guidance is the rear view mirror. While there's no shortage of ideas about what should be done next, all you have to do is watch the news and you'll see what I mean. Some of these ideas conflict with other ideas, and it seems everyone has their own opinion. How does all this affect special education students? Well, the challenges that typical students face are magnified in children with disabilities. This was true even before the pandemic. The demands of school, such as maintaining attention, staying organized, meeting deadlines, adapting to change, these tasks are difficult for typical students from time to time. But for many special education students, these tasks are overwhelming, even in normal times, especially for students who aren't good communicators or who have difficulty focusing. Add the challenges of remote instruction to the mix, and you get a situation that's far from ideal. Now, don't get me wrong, there are special education students who make appropriate progress with remote instruction. Some of them actually do better than they did when they were in school. It's important to note that, to celebrate it. But for some of our children, engaging with a computer for remote instruction is practically impossible. I could go on. But if it's like that with a student near you, then you already understand what I mean. So, to whom shall we point our finger of blame? I'd like to suggest not the school people. Less than a year ago, no one was thinking about remote instruction. No one was prepared for it. Then the pandemic struck. When the schools shut down their doors, school people had to find new ways to keep our children's learning going, seemingly overnight. It's been an ongoing challenge for our schools ever since, and for our children as well. If you're looking to blame something, I suggest we look to the source of our woes, the pandemic itself. The pandemic has also affected how PPT meetings are conducted. You may have noticed that if you attended a PPT meeting lately. Like the difficulties our children face with remote learning, the difficulties parents face when going to online PPT meetings are magnified too. That's why this edition of Answers is going to focus on how to have a successful online PPT meeting. But first, some information about PPT meetings from Audra Talbot.
This is going to be a PPT 101. What is a PPT? PPT stands for Planning and Placement Team. It is a multidisciplinary team of educators and specialists who provide special education to students with disabilities who are eligible for services. Typically, the team consists of an administrator who can act on behalf of the school district or their designee. Sometimes the administrator is a special education supervisor from central office. Sometimes the administrator is the school principal. Sometimes it's a designee. The team also has a general education teacher, a special education teacher, and a professional who is qualified to interpret special education testing. This is usually the school psychologist. If a special education student needs related services, such as occupational therapy or physical therapy, then the team has a representative from the appropriate discipline. The student's parents are members of the PPT team. They should be treated as full and equal partners every step of the way. They are also the most important part of the PPT team. Parents have great knowledge of their children. They are the subject matter experts of their child. And while the members of the PPT team change as the student progresses through the grades, it is the parents who are the only constant members. Planning and placement teams are a requirement of the IDEA, the federal law that was created for special education in 1975. In most states outside of Connecticut, they are known as IEP teams. But here in Connecticut, it's the PPT team. What is a PPT meeting? PPT meetings are team meetings that usually center around creating or updating the IEP, the special education student's individual educational program, IEP. PPT meetings are also where a student's eligibility for special education is determined. If you have a child with an IEP, then you went through one of these meetings already. PPT meetings can be held for other purposes too, to review a program, to plan and review evaluations, to consider transition planning. If a special education student is facing discipline for violating their school's code of conduct, and simply if a parent requests one, this is a request that cannot be turned down. In most states outside of Connecticut, these meetings are called IEP meetings. Not in Connecticut, we call them PPT meetings. Annual review PPT meeting. In addition to the above, every special education student has an annual review PPT meeting. At these meetings, the student's eligibility for another year of special education is determined. If a student is found eligible, IEP goals and objectives for the upcoming year are written or revised as necessary, and parents absolutely have a hand in that revision of the IEP. Who attends PPT meetings? Common sense would dictate attendance by the school professionals who work directly with the child. And that is what usually happens. However, to satisfy their obligations, the school only has to provide staff with certain job titles: an administrator or their designee, a general education teacher, a special education teacher, a professional who can interpret special education testing, and related service providers who work in the appropriate discipline. It doesn't matter if the staff member has never met the student. Actually, it does matter, but it satisfies the school's obligations. This is another reason why parents are the most important part of PPT teams. PPT team members who are going to be absent on the day of a PPT meeting should file a written report if possible. Parents must give their written consent to continue with the meeting in that event. That's why it's super important to have your invitation that you received from the school district at your meeting, so you can go down the list of participants and make sure everyone is attending. It's important for parents to know that they can request the presence of their child's paraprofessional at the PPT meeting. To make it happen, parents should make the request in writing, and emailed is considered in writing at least 5 school days before the meeting. It is also important for parents to know they can invite anyone they want to accompany them to a PPT meeting: a service provider, a friend, or even an advocate. Again, you can ask anyone that you feel is necessary to attend your meeting. It's part of the IDEA law. Rules around PPT meetings. There are so many rules and requirements around PPT meetings that would take a separate webinar to cover them all. One of the most important rules is prior written notice of PPT meetings, which is my personal favorite. The federal law, IDEA, requires schools to give parents of special education students prior written notice of PPT meetings at least 5 school days in advance of the meeting. Another important rule: if a new evaluation by the school will be considered during a PPT meeting, parents should receive the evaluation before the PPT meeting so they can review it in advance. If the evaluation is an initial evaluation, that is the first evaluation that is used to determine eligibility, state law calls for providing the evaluation no less than 3 school days in advance. If it's not an initial evaluation, IDEA requirements call for providing the evaluation in advance to parents. Although the timeline does not state a minimum number of days, I always advise parents to ask for that 5 school days in advance in writing to the school team. Rules and regulations aside, I found that most school districts routinely provide evaluations to parents in advance. If parents, it's parents. It's part of their standard operating procedure. If it's not that way in your school district, then you should ask for it in advance in writing, 5 school days. Thank you for watching. Back to you, Kevin.
So on to the main event: how to have a successful online PPT meeting. Before getting into that, one has to ask, what is a successful PPT meeting? How do you define that? To us parents, is it when we get everything we ask for? Perhaps. But parents don't always get everything they ask for at PPT meetings. If that happens, does it mean the meeting was a failure? Not necessarily. A successful PPT meeting should be a meeting where everyone, including parents, collaborates on a level playing field. A meeting where parents are included, and they're included every step of the way, just like Audra said. It shouldn't be a dog and pony show where parents come in and look at what the school is doing and then leave. No, it's not a spectator sport, folks. To me, a successful PPT meeting is a meeting where parents feel free to ask questions, make requests, and take part in the decision-making process. A meeting where there's an effort made to resolve disagreements, perhaps by collaborating, to find a third solution that's agreeable to all parties. Now, I realize that not every PPT meeting works that way. Sometimes it can be a tug of war or an exercise in assertiveness training, or it's time to get out the boxing gloves. I get it. I get it. What I describe as a successful PPT meeting is an ideal situation. And it's important to have ideals, especially when reality doesn't match our ideals. Ideals give us something to work toward. Without ideals, we become bitter and cynical. Although inside every cynic is a disappointed idealist, as George Carlin once said, we parents do have some control over just how successful our online PPT meetings are. And that's what the rest of this webinar is about. These days, when going to PPT, parents face all the challenges they faced before the pandemic. And some of these challenges are even greater due to the nature of online meetings. Plus, there are many new challenges that need to be overcome. The key to having a successful online PPT meeting is to do your homework. Do your homework before the meeting. You need to gather your thoughts and decide what you want to accomplish. You need to understand the technology and how to use it to your advantage. You need to understand the progress that your child is making. All this can be accomplished if you do your homework. But before you can have a successful PPT meeting online, it's important to understand the nature of the beast you're dealing with: online video conferencing. Online PPT meetings usually take place using Google Meet, Zoom, or Microsoft Teams. It's likely your school district uses only one of these apps for PPT meetings. Google Meet seems to be the most popular. As all three apps give you the ability to focus directly on speakers rather than someone sitting at the other end of the table. If you have questions or if you want to speak, you can use an icon to electronically raise your hand. Looks like that. Everyone at the meeting will see your hand and they will know they need to stop and listen to you. These apps also allow you to share documents you have on your computer using screen share. All three apps offer closed captioning, which is great if you have difficulty hearing. With Google Meet, closed captioning is built in, and it's very accurate too. Closed captioning is built into Microsoft Teams, and it's not built into Zoom, but if you have your administrator set it up, you can use it. Another nice feature: names are displayed. It helps you to associate names with faces. That's important. And here's my face. And by the way, my name is not Carmina. I'm not sure how that happened, but well, anyway. The names are displayed, which is a nice feature. It helps you associate names with faces, and the same is true for the school people on the other end. Using these apps, you can turn off your camera, like I did, if you want to, although I don't advise it. It makes you appear disinterested, although it's good to know it's there in case someone at your house walks by in the background without adequate clothing. You can mute your microphone, which is a nice courtesy if you aren't talking. It also enables you to talk with people in the room privately. You can also use your phone to text a friend during the meeting or an advocate. That can be quite helpful. It's like passing notes in front of the teacher and you'll never get caught. What's the best device to use for an online PPT meeting? Phone, desktop, laptop? I realize there's no choice sometimes, but if there is a choice, the larger screen of a desktop or a laptop give you an advantage over your phones. On a larger screen, you can clearly see everyone at the meeting at once, their comments, their reactions. I believe that would give anyone an advantage. On your phone, you can only view who is speaking. So you should be familiar with these apps or whatever app is used in your school district. All three are available at no cost from their manufacturers. So find out what app your school district is using for PPT meetings, download the app, and click around. Get a free copy and learn the ropes. It will give you an advantage. You should also take great care with the PPT invitations you receive. I mean the email you receive from the school that contains the link you need to enter the meeting. Check the invitation to see how much time is allotted for your PPT meeting. Many school districts routinely allow only 45 minutes for PPT meetings. It used to be about an hour. Sometimes 45 minutes is enough to talk, but if you're going to an annual review PPT meeting where there's a triennial evaluation that will be discussed and you have a long list of concerns, you might need more than 45 minutes. So if you do need more time, ask for it. And ask for it promptly so it's easier for the school people to reschedule. And be sure to let the school people know you're bringing someone to the meeting. The school will need to send them an email with a link to get in. Another way to do your homework for a successful PPT meeting is to be familiar with your child's school records and evaluations. I mean, special ed testing, IEPs, report cards, progress reports. If you don't have a complete set of your child's school records on hand, then ask for one, then read them. If new evaluations will be discussed for the first time at your online PPT meeting, get the evaluations in advance and then read them. So how does one accomplish these things? To request your child's school records, I suggest emailing your request to the school principal. Be sure to ask for the cumulative file and the special education file. Now, any parent of a Connecticut public school student can request a copy of their child's school records. This is nothing unusual. It's quite routine. If a written request for school records states they're needed to prepare for a PPT meeting, the school has 5 school days to comply. Otherwise, it's 10 school days. How do you get those new evaluations in advance before you go to PPT to consider them? Well, a good time to ask is when you're asked to sign the consent form for the evaluation. Otherwise, email your child's case manager and the administrator on your PPT team. That should be sufficient. One last point about school records. Reading them can be overwhelming, especially the evaluations. If you need help with school records, it's a good idea to ask one of the members of your PPT team to assist. Or you could ask another parent. You could even ask an advocate. And also, you're entitled to only one free copy of your child's school records. Your school district can charge a per-page fee after the first free copy. Another way to ensure a successful online PPT meeting is to gather your thoughts and write up a list of your input and concerns for the meeting. Include your questions, requests, things you see at home, everything that you want from the meeting. Then forward the list to the school people. That way they can plan an intelligent response to what you're asking for. Keep your list short and to the point. The details will come out during the meeting. And if you have any new reports or documents that you have that you want to bring to the meeting, submit that in advance too, so the school people can appreciate what's in there. Here's an example of a very simplified list. See how it's short, only half a page? Let's take a closer look. Every statement is like headlines, short and right to the point, not even complete sentences. See, the goal here is to communicate, to give the school people a heads up. And in this world, how you ask for something and when you ask for it very often make a big difference in the response that you get. School people are usually grateful when a parent shares their concerns in advance. It makes you look more professional, like a team player. School people respect that. I think everybody respects that. So writing your list of input and concerns is probably the most important thing you could do to prepare for a successful online PPT meeting. And if you do that and follow the other practices that I've shared, you will have the knowledge that you did everything that you could possibly do to have a successful PPT meeting. It's a great feeling, and it's important for your child. Now it's time for Q&A with participants. So if you haven't already, please share your questions with us. And I'm going to get Audra back. Here's Audra.
Hi, Kevin. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Good. Welcome, everyone.
So what do we have for questions? You know, there was a question that was submitted in advance. It was from a parent who went to an online PPT meeting. Now, the parent was bringing an advocate to the meeting and also her husband. The parent was very surprised to find out just before the meeting started that her advocate would not be allowed to attend the meeting, and her husband would be on mute throughout the meeting. Audra, as an advocate, tell me, what do you think about this?
I think that's a blatant violation. That's, if you want my honest answer. It's a violation to the parental participation in a PPT meeting because parents are allowed to bring whomever they want to the meeting, as I stated in the PPT 101 presentation you saw at the beginning of our segment. I think a good way to approach that is to very respectfully tell whoever is the administrator that you have brought an advocate to your meeting and you would like them to participate. Give them a chance to rethink their decision. And if they choose not to, then you need to bring it to the higher ups to have other people help them rethink their decision.
I like how you put that. Yes.
And in writing, I would absolutely, so everything you do needs to be in writing because it needs to be in black and white and documented in your student's file. Because that is literally your path to everything. Because if it was just a verbal phone call, it didn't really happen because it's not written down in the record. So I would absolutely write an email to the team, to the person that made that decision. That's my first stop. And then if nothing was resolved from there, I would take it to the next person who would be the special services supervisor, whomever that may be on your child's case, in writing and CC'd to the entire team. And then there should be some resolution at that stage. But if there's not, then you just keep going. And of course, in those types of situations, if an advocate's involved, they can definitely lead you through that process, navigate that process. And the wording of your emails is important too, to always be respectful, but to use your assertiveness when appropriate.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Now, here is a question that's come in through the chat.
Okay.
And the parents refuse to add or insist on adding a goal to the IEP? Good question.
That's an excellent question.
What do you think about that, Audra?
Well, I'd be careful with the word refuse. I think that's, you have to have a discussion because you don't want to burn bridges, mostly because you have to work with this team for either the year or the next couple of years with your child being in that school. So you definitely do want to do that with due respect, but also, having an open discussion with whoever wrote that goal and objective, whatever part of that, the goal and objectives that was part of that IEP. You want to have a discussion with them first, why they feel as though that was a relevant goal for your child, and what the data collection would look like. How is that measurable? And I think if you have a conversation with them, maybe the goal just needs to be rewritten or broken down into separate goals, because sometimes I find that goals they need to be within a year, obtainable within a year, because that's what your next annual review. That's the first thing. They need to be measurable always, because how do you know if there's progress or no progress if they're not measurable goals? In different forms to measure: observation, data collection, all that kind of stuff. But it needs to be a collaboration between the parents, the subject matter experts on their child, and whomever wrote that goal and objective, because maybe that person in the school team, to give them validity, is seeing something that does need to be worked on. So I hope that answers the question, unless you have something else to add to that, Kevin.
No, nothing to add. I agree with you on that. Another question that's come in.
Okay.
Can we ask for our child's records and evaluations to be sent by email? And is there a charge? Now, this again is typical of the kind of questions that come up in the COVID-19 era. I don't know about your experience, Audra, but in my experience, the electronic records, they all started being produced in masse about 5 years ago with the advent of software like the school people use. I don't know if your child is, an older child, what it would take to scan and digitize your child's school records. They may stay in the file on paper, and it is possible the school may or may not be able to scan them. I think it's important that if you would like them in electronic form, that you should ask for that. And even though, in my opinion, there shouldn't be a charge unless you're asking for a second set of records, that is an interesting prospect. What do you think, Audra?
So I have a couple of thoughts about that. So I have been in that situation as an advocate. Let's back up for a second. So as far as, again, not knowing the age of the child or student, I personally, like my two kids, I have an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old, and we've been in the special education system for a good amount of time. And those are all my wrinkles right here, my gray hair. But, to have all the digitized records, the first thought I had was we would miss something because not everything was digitized. That's, kind of like mid to older kids. I think you would miss something if you had asked for that over email, and it's a daunting process for the school, and they're going to give you pushback. If it's a younger child, say like a pre-K up to maybe maybe second or third grader, I think it's possible. But again, I think that if there's anything written that's not digitized in the record, you're not going to get it. When I ask for, so it's called a FERPA request. It's a formal records request. It's FERPA. It's the acronym for the law that says that you have the right to request the ones your records. Sorry, not enough coffee today. So in my FERPA request, that is like a template, I say that I want every email, pretty much anything with my child or my client's name on it, email report, IEP, progress note, pretty much every scrap of paper that has the student's name on it, you're privy to. And so that's what my request looks like. I have to tell you, I've never gotten a digital record, like a full school digital record for either one of my kids, because I'd worry about them missing something. So that's the first part of that. The second part of that is, I bet you that the school's worried about a liability issue. And I say that because perchance that email goes to someone else, because that happens once in a blue moon. Another parent will get an email of another child's IEP or another record. So it happens, because we should never say never about things in life. So I would imagine that could be kind of, playing devil's advocate. That would be something the district would say, we can't do it over email. I don't know if you've gotten into that situation, whomever asked that question, but I think it can be done. I think it has to be done with caution and with protection for your child's records, because that's golden, those records, to me, because that's what I go off of. And in my opinion, my humble opinion, I don't think you should be charged for it, because it still counts as your one copy per year. And I don't believe in, I would have to look this up, because I have to say I'm not entirely sure, so I'm going to look this up after our meeting. But it doesn't matter if it's digital. It doesn't matter if it's, or hard copy. It's still a copy of the record. So it should not be a charge to the parents by any stretch of the imagination. So I hope that kind of fills in the holes there for you.
Yeah, and I agree with you, especially about the charge. It would be different if it's not the first time, but that would be pretty hard to justify otherwise. Another question from the chat. Due to the corona, can we request an extension to our child's placement in a special education school? And it's been my experience that decisions on outplacement are usually based on a child's educational performance. And even though I can see it makes a lot of sense not to switch schools at a time of a pandemic, the reasons students are outplaced, and well, the reason that students are found eligible for special ed and everything they get, it should be based on the student's performance, and that performance compared to their typical peers. What do you think about that, Audra?
So I think there's layers to that question. And without talking to the parent personally, I don't know their specific situation. So that's, when I heard the question, the first thing that came into my mind was stay put. And I have two children, two special education children. And one of my biggest worries when the pandemic first hit, my parental worry was, oh my gosh, what if the district pulls somebody back into district, or, it's like your mind is racing, like, oh my gosh, but I think that the layers include, it matters if, part of the agreement you have with your school district is if you've waived your stay put, which is, that's part of settlement agreements sometimes with school districts to avoid going into due process. It depends, and so, feel free to reach out, and, I'm happy to help you problem solve that one, because it's a tough one. I think if the child's not making progress in an out of district placement, that needs to be looked at, and a conversation needs to be had with the school district, the placement, and the parents, and whatever service providers are providing, within the prospective school. Maybe there's another school that can be looked at to still continue in out of district placement. But then you throw in corona, you throw in a pandemic where kids with multiple exceptionalities are stuck at home not accessing their learning, or if they are accessing their learning online, how well are they accessing it? And so there is going to be regression. And I think that that's kind of where your argument back to the school district, if they wanted to pull your child back to them, that could be one of your arguments, is that we anticipated regression. We need to give it some time to see if there can be progress made, and, you know, and then stay put, you know, while the parents and the schools argue out everything that's going on. If you still have that stay put protection in place, if that has not been waived, then you are able to keep your child in the current placement while the parent, you know, later on, that's, you know, if you go further to due process, hopefully not, but that's a tool that you can use, you know, to kind of problem solve that. But again, it's a tough question, because I think every case is different, just like every IEP is different. Every kid with exceptionality is different. So I know that probably doesn't answer your question too much, but it's depends. It's my best one on that one.
Yes, it does depend. Another factor to consider, something that it also depends on, is the opinion of the folks at the private school as to whether the student is ready to leave or not. It's not the right thing to do to simply take a child out of a private school for no more goal than to put them back in the mainstream. If a child is shown the need for a private school through their educational performance should really determine whether they're ready to go back or not. And who knows this performance better than the teachers and staff that work with the child on a day-to-day basis? So the opinion of the folks at the private school, that's a factor too.
You know what, Kevin, I just thought of something too. I just, you know, on the tail end of that, throwing in, and maybe some new evaluations to assess where the child is currently. Data. It's all about the data. Every day it's about the data, and you should not be making any decisions without data to support those decisions. You know, if the child is making progress, awesome. You know, take it from there. But I think that if you have, you know, if you request new evaluations, if the private school can do them, great. If the district can support that with their personnel, great. But there's also the option to ask for an individual educational evaluation, an IEE, with, you know, subject matter experts and whatever discipline that you want to have assessed, whether it's speech and language or if it's neuropsychological testing. So I think that's another option too. So you have the data to support the decision.
Definitely. We have another question in the chat from a parent who is interested in meeting with the teacher. Is there a limit to how frequently we can request to meet with our child's special education teacher? And while one would think that there is a practical limit because, well, teachers have to teach rather than just meet, the parent-teacher communication, that's the linchpin between school and home and success and failure. What do you think about that, Audra?
So in my world, no.
Is there a limit?
In my world as a parent, no, I don't think there's a limit. That's my personal opinion, but I think you have to do it respectfully. I have, you know, again, my two kids, you know, when something comes up, I send an email and I'm able to have an email communication with the teacher back and forth, or whatever service provider I have a question for, whether it's a speech and language, OT, PT, it doesn't matter, whoever it is on the school team, right? So I think number one, there needs to be open and specific communication between home and school. So that's why I always say in my PPT meetings with clients and for my own children, we need to have, you know, an easy way to communicate, respectful of their time, but also respectful of my need to get some answers if I have a question in a good amount of time, whether it's 24 hours or 48 hours, depending on the issue. I also think it's very important to, if you want to request because we're not doing in-person team meetings, request that in advance. So who you want to be at that meeting can be there, whether it be a team meeting with school staff, or if it's a team meeting with the BCBA and the special ed teacher. Again, being respectful of their time, because they do have a lot of kids to deal with. And I get it. You know, we're all busy. But also respecting the parents' need to, you know, be part of this system, because you are the first member of the team. It says so in the IDEA law. It's literally the first person. You are the first person as the parent. So requesting that in writing, again, everything in writing. I, as a habit, as an advocate, ask for team meetings, depending on the case, of course, because we're talking about individualized programming. I ask for a team meeting either monthly or bi-monthly, and I ask for that to be put into the IEP under the accommodations page on page 8. Is that, you know, you're going to have a conversation with them, you're going to set up the team meetings, or set up 3 of them in advance, so you have the dates already put out there. So you have the open communication, because you do not, under any circumstances, want to be burning bridges with the people who are working with your children. I just, you know, I'm a big proponent of having open and fluid communication, always. So no, I don't think there's a limit on team meetings. And I think if any school district tells you that, they're just, you know, ask for the policy. Because I bet you there's not.
That's often a good strategy to take when something seems questionable. Ask for the policy.
Yeah. That's one of my favorites. The prior written notice is my favorite, and ask for the policy is my other favorite.
I have a feeling that the next question is on a topic that's one of your favorites too. Now, you and I both talked about the importance of seeing school evaluations in advance before the PPT meeting, where they'll be discussed and presented. Here's a question about getting not evaluations, but proposed goals and teacher reports in advance. How are we parents, excuse me, how are we parents supposed to get copies of the progress reports and proposed goals since we aren't in person? Do educators have to get us paper copies in a certain amount of time? I don't believe that there is a certain timeline for getting them to you in advance, like there is, say, for an initial evaluation where state law says you have to have it no less than 3 days in advance. But there are some things that you can go on with common sense and being allowed to prepare for the meeting as an equal member of the team and being given access to the same materials that other team members have in advance. Audra, I think you know what I'm talking about. How would you answer this question?
Well, I believe parental participation is one of the greatest tools you have for your children in navigating special education. And you cannot fully participate in a PPT meeting, a parent meeting, whatever, you know, wherever you're going to go and talk about your evaluations reports, progress reports, IEPs, goals and objectives, doesn't matter. If you do not have the information in advance, you cannot be a full member of the PPT meeting. And that there's nothing more that I despise than having parents not being treated fairly in these types of situations. The playing field is not leveled. The school team has all the information, and you're presented with this at the meeting. You're already overwhelmed walking in because this is about your baby. This is about your child. You're already overwhelmed because everybody else in the room is sitting across from you, and you're either with you or your spouse or your partner, maybe an advocate, and it's overwhelming in that aspect. And then on Zoom meetings, it's even more overwhelming because you know you only have an hour, which don't even get me started about that one. You absolutely should be requesting that in writing over email to the case manager. I always say the case manager. It's usually a special education teacher. It would be on the front of your IEP. It'll tell you who the case manager is. It shouldn't just say resource teacher as case manager. It should actually say a name. Remember that one. So yes, request in writing, 5 school days in advance. Kevin's laughing because he knows where I'm going with all this. So 5 school days in advance of your PPT meeting. If they get it to you before that, awesome. If they get it to you a day before the PPT meeting, they're trying their best. I get it. But, you need time to review that, to read it, kind of digest it, because it is hard to read about your child. I mean, this is the part that I think a lot of this misses. And I brought this up to, in different boards and committees throughout the state, is that it's just different, for a parent versus a school team. This is purely about emotion and, how you're going to react in a meeting. And you're not going to react well if they're changing things in an IEP based on a report that you were literally just given. So as far as the paper copy of everything, I'm old school when it comes to that kind of stuff. I like to have a paper copy. They send it home in my child's backpack from the school. I'm okay with that, because my kids are going to take it and chuck it. But if you have a high school kid that doesn't want you to read what's going on, that's probably not the best avenue to take. So yeah, digital reports are okay. That the school psychologist is going to send home whatever report they have that they'll be reporting out on in their PPT meeting. I can't think what the next part of that question was. I think I covered all of it. But paper or digital, I don't think it really matters. They really shouldn't. They can mail it, but the mail's been awful lately. It's like 10 days to get something from one point in town to the next. So I wouldn't rely on that. I think if they put it in a manila envelope, was sealed with tape in your kid's backpack, or send it digitally, it covers that base of you getting that in a good amount of time, so you can read it, digest it, and probably read it and highlight and take some notes on it about what you want to address and what your questions are. And then if those questions, are from that report, reach out to them before the meeting and say, I just, you wrote it this way. Like, why did you write it? Sorry. So, again, this is about you. This is about your child. 10 years from now, the people on the school team aren't even going to remember who your child was. This is your future. You have to be more assertive. Ask for everything in writing.
That's important. And the bottom line is that it won't happen if you don't ask for it. So ask for it. That's our job as parents in so many ways, to make sure that things are happening, not to do them ourselves, although we often have to. It's to make sure that things happen. Now, here's a question from a parent who has a child with a 504 plan.
Oh, good.
And many of the things that we've been saying about online PPT meetings, they also apply to online 504 meetings. They are different laws, and students with 504 plans do have rights, but they are different than they are from special education students. Well, here's the question. Is it against 504 not to allow for an accommodation of reduced workload for a child with an ADHD disability? The sending school in agreement with the parents, but the receiving school said that an accommodation was not feasible at this time. Now, reading between the lines, it sounds like we have a situation where a student has been sent to another school, and that other school is communicating certain things to the parents. So what is it, Audra? How does it work in 504? Does a diagnosis give you a certain accommodation, or is it based on educational need like it is for an IEP?
Well, I think, I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with a 504 versus an IEP. I think that's first thing. And then second thing is, I think that it's a 504 technically is based on whatever the diagnosis is. Excuse me 1 second. Sorry, Kevin, you have to take over for a second.
Let's return to this question in a second. Now, here's a question. Can you request a PPT using something other than a phone conference? Bristol uses phone conferences, and it is so hard to keep track of who is talking when. Yes, in that particular city, I have run into that too, where the conferences are held by phone teleconferences as opposed to video conferences. What do you think, Audra? Do we parents have the right to ask for a video conference, or is this something the school people are controlling?
So, I find it very, very hard to have a telephone conference. I've had many of those for my own children, being in the same prospective town. And as an advocate, I don't find that a lot of other towns have that option. A lot of other towns have the video option and the telephone option. I find it hindering, speaking personally, as a parent, to be able to have purely just a telephone conference regarding my very involved children. I don't, off the top of my head, I don't think that the State Board of Special Education, the special ed unit, has mandated any school district that they have to have a video conference over a telephonic conference, but I think it should be best practice. And I say that with great respect to the, particular district that does that exclusively, but it's I don't think it's a confidentiality thing. I really don't. Because a lot of other school districts are doing it. Pretty much every school district that I have a meeting in, I had one this morning, it was Zoom or it was Google Meets. And it's just better. It's just better in so many ways. I mean, it's the human contact, as a sidebar, but also you can navigate it better. You can share documents. You can have a give and take conversation with, unfortunately, just a head or a face, but it's respectful in a way versus just a telephone where someone's just, participating. They send you the reports by email in advance, hopefully, goals and objectives in advance, hopefully, and you're discussing those. And you're missing something by just doing on the telephone. So I have a guest who's asking that question. And, I would request do it over Google Meets or Zoom and see what happens, request it in writing. But unfortunately, there's not really anything that I think you can hold them to in order to make that happen if they give you pushback on it. You can just try to sell that with, I need to be able to share information with you. And then, I could just imagine, they'll say, well, you can share it over email. Well, it's missed if you're not doing it, like this. So, and I think a lot of parents, it's hard for them to do it on the telephone, especially if they have kids who are remote learning home, because that's not easy to have a telephone conference. I had to do a telephone PPT meeting with both of my children home. That was not fun. So I think it holds our attention better as parents. I think you can have that face-to-face conversation because these are the people that you're trusting with your children and you're building those bridges. And I don't think it builds bridges to have a telephone PPT meeting. But that's just my opinion.
Well, I can only think that it would be better for school people too, who are using telephone conferences to move to video conferences. It's a lot more efficient for them. The meeting goes a lot better. So it could be every teacher and staff member who's in one of these teleconference PPT meetings wishes they were in a video meeting. But I'd like to return to that question from the parent who has a 504 student with ADHD.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had someone coming down the stairs. A child was coming down the stairs, so I had to zoom out for a second. Yeah, I'm back.
Our kids do that now and
Yeah.
then, and they make life interesting. They're a blessing. Yeah. Anyway, the parent and the sending school agree that an accommodation of extended time would be appropriate. The receiving school does not agree. And the question is it against 504? And well, I would think that the child's need for extended time is something that ought to be a factor here. I could only guess how they handle things in the receiving school. Are they handling things in a way so that extended time is not necessary? Are they handling assignments and projects differently? Some of these private schools do things very differently than in public education. But I think ultimately the student's need for extended time should dictate it. And it is possible for a student who is in a public school to need extended time for certain assignments and quizzes and that kind of thing, not to need extended time in a private setting because the program is so different, because the ratio of teachers to students is so different. So it's important to keep an open mind, but like I said, I think the child's need in the given situation should determine what happens.
I agree. I think that because every child is different, and within their domain of exceptionalities, I mean, if you take autism, autism is autism, but every child with autism, every human with autism is different. That's why it's called an autism spectrum, because not one person is the same as the other. And I think that when we look at accommodations, regardless if it's under a 504 or an IEP, accommodation should be given when prudent. I mean, they shouldn't be abused to a point where a child's just taking 10 breaks a day because they just want to walk around the high school. But it's just, I think within reason is always good, because we still want our child to access their education. But yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine why a receiving school wouldn't be giving extensions on extra time coming from another school. Like, that it's already established that this child needs this. I mean, I would want data. I would want to see why. Why do you think that this is happening? How many times a day is this happening? How long is it happening? In what subject is it happening? Or what related service is it happening? I mean, I have 10 questions that pop in my head when I hear stuff like that. So yeah, ask the questions in writing over email. So when you get your response, it's not over the telephone, and then you have it in email and it's a part of your record. So if you need to go further with that, you have something with teeth.
Here's a question from someone who says, what are some ways to set a positive, collaborative tone at the start of the meeting? I know many parents who, back in the days when we went to school for PPT meetings, would bring food with them, a snack for everyone at the meeting. It's a nice touch. Certainly not something so persuasive that it opens locked doors, but it is a nice courtesy that school people, they do appreciate. You can't do that at a virtual PPT meeting, an online PPT meeting. But what I'd like to suggest is, when you write your list of input and concerns for the meeting, now this is a document that will go out in advance of the meeting. People will see it before the meeting. Make the very first item in your list an expression of gratitude. We are grateful for the many efforts of our team to support Tommy in school this year. Tommy enjoys going to school, and he feels like he's part of the school community. Thank you for doing your job so well. Something along the lines of that. I'll tell you, folks, school people, they often get little acknowledgement, almost no acknowledgement of the hard work that they do. If you would like to set a positive tone for one of your PPT meetings, acknowledge the hard work that they're doing. It doesn't mean that you have to raise a white flag and agree with everything, but it does mean that you're grateful for their work and they will appreciate it. They'll appreciate you too.
I agree. I think you get more flies with honey. That's where I stand on that one. And it's not a strategy. It's because we're nice people. And we are truly thankful to school teams. It's not because we're trying to get something out of them, at least not me, not me as a parent. So I can tell you, when I was in-person meetings, even as a brand new parent, one of the first things I did was I brought a box of coffee to the team because I knew they were probably exhausted from dealing with my son. Because he's a busy guy. He loves to run around and he's all over the place. Like, I get it, because I have to do it, and I know they're tired. I get it, and they do it well. They show up every day. They got into this business to educate. These are our educators. We need to be thankful for them. All the other ancillary stuff that happens, it's usually not the educators. And so we need to remember that. We need to be, I personally am thankful too, and I say it very frequently on Facebook for a lot of, throughout the years, I had 2 kids go through birth to 3, all the way up into, whatever prospective grade they're in now. We have had a tremendous amount of service providers touch our lives, and I'll consider them as part of our family because they're in it for my kid. They didn't sign up, to teach special education, for their own doing. They did it because they truly care and they want to make a difference in the world. And so I think bringing them a box of coffee is just a small gesture, but it's still a gesture. And then also, Kevin, I agree with you. I think when you do your list of parental concerns, your number one is a thank you. Especially now during this pandemic and this COVID, all of these teachers, regular education or special education teachers, all your related service providers, every single one of them had to relearn how to teach your children. And I think that is a feat in itself, because I have watched some really tremendous things happen. And I personally know teachers that have been in tears because they are trying so hard and they feel like they're not doing it well. So I think a little thank you goes a long way. I've even when my kids were in, their grammar school grades up into middle school, or, the preamble to middle school, when I knew we were going to have a long and tough meeting, I would bring something, some small little, we had kind bars. That was always one of my favorite things to bring to meetings. Was I'm giving a plug to the company now, but it's KIND. I brought kind bars to a PPT meeting. I'm a nice girl, most of the time, but it's just, I wanted to have a show of solidarity, is that it's not us against them. It never will be. It's always a team approach, because it says so in the IDEA law, but also because I'm trusting you with my children all day, every day. And yes, I'm going to give you pushback if I don't agree with something, respectfully, but it's not because I don't trust your subject matter expertise. It's because either I don't understand and I'm going to ask you to explain it, or don't agree, and let's talk about how we can make it better and find a solution. So yeah, you should say thank you and bring food, because school teams love food and coffee.
Yes, and one good thing about food is it's very hard to yell at someone when you have a full mouth of food. So
Right.
it does set you up for a peaceful meeting. Now, here's a question from the parent of a middle school student.
Yeah.
He's going to high school next year. My son is going to high school next year. He's actually going to a different district high school. We are having a PPT meeting in April with our current middle school. Should we ask that the current school invite the team from the new out-of-district high school to attend, or will we just have a PPT with the new school separately? Now, Audra, I know you've been to a lot of PPT meetings, the transition PPT meetings between middle school and high school. What do you think about this question?
Yes. And, you know, it doesn't, I think it would be hard to have the entire team from the incoming school be there because they have to deliver service, especially during the COVID era. But I think to have, you know, depending on whatever the exceptionality is for your child, your educational designation, your eligibility for, you know, whether it's dyslexia, ADHD, autism, multiple disabilities, intellectual disability, you know, I don't know what that is. You know, of course, it, you know, individualized. So every answer could be different. But I think that's really important. For example, if you had a child with autism that is transitioning into a brand new school, and this is a kid maybe with apraxia, speech and language apraxia, maybe a child who has a tremendous amount of resource needs. Yes, you should have a special education teacher there. Whoever the case manager is, I think that's your number one person, because that's your point of contact at the new school. They need to know this kid. They need to see the decisions being made for the incoming IEP and maybe even give their input on it so it can get put into the IEP. And also, you know, if you have a kid with, like I said, stated previously, with a speech and language communication disorder, you know, having a speech and language pathologist there to help look at the goals and objectives, give their feedback on it. So, you know, that's a long answer for yes, but yes, I think it's building a new relationship. I mean, you're going from one into the other, and you don't want that drop down, because you want your child to hit the ground running when you get to this new placement. So I think that's really super important. And your current case manager should be the one reaching out to the new placement, or wherever the new high school out of district placement is.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Here's a question. After getting your initial records, and it's free of charge, what if you want updated records? I'm thinking they have in mind the records that were produced after you made your request.
Yeah.
Are those charged? And when is a good time to request? What do you think about that, Audra?
So, speaking from experience, the date that your records were sent. So say, here, I'll give you an example, because I think it's easier to explain with examples. That's how I live my life mostly. Say you get your records from the beginning of this school year 2020, like September, to January of 2021, right? And so now, in a couple of months, you want the records from February to the end of the school year, right? I believe that is not a charge, because that's still your part of your year annual. I have never been charged when I sent that second request, because it's still part of that yearly part, that records just weren't even produced yet for them to send to you. So those are technically new records as part of that annual record request. I don't know if you have a different instance, Kevin, but I believe, and of course it needs to be in writing, because that's how you're requesting your records. But what I do is I put the date on there, so there's no discrepancy within the central office, you know, area where all the records are done. The FERPA officer can look at that and say, oh, we've given them the records up until this date. We're going to start here, and we're going to give them the rest of the records, and then that's your free one copy. And so I've actually done that.
Okay, and we now have time for one more question. However, to those of you who are participating, if you submitted a question and it was not answered, I would like you to email it to me, kdaly, KDALY, at pathct.org. That's kdaly at pathct.org. If you email your question to me, I will personally answer it. So let's get to our one last question. PPTs are being done remote, but what about actual evaluations? In person or remote? If remote, how accurate are they? What do you think, Audra?
So I've dealt with this many times since COVID hit us and those pandemics that everyone's spinning into remote learning. Depends what district, depends what type of evaluation. If you're doing standardized testing, for example, like when you have to like just check the boxes and you're doing the parent, special ed teacher, and maybe one of the service providers, for example, like I'm not going to throw out a test, but a standardized test, I think that can be done. I think for the type of testing that needs to be done with the fidelity that it needs to be done in person. And I think that there's this gray area. You can't, yes, some outside providers are doing encrypted, like web-based testing. Depends on the kid, depends on their level of communication, their attention, psychological testing, school-based psychological testing, I think would be very, very hard to do. For the parts of it that need to be done for observational data over remote learning. I do know of a couple instances, cases that I have that we had to wait in order to get valid data to put into a report in order to write those goals and objectives, honestly, because I don't want to look at testing that was done pre-COVID and then because what's happening sometimes is there's testing that's been done 6 months ago, and then goals and objectives are being written on that based off of like the testing from that, and it's not even valid anymore. So to me, like, it's a wash. Unfortunately, this pandemic has just put a spin on everything we do in special education and how well we do it and how we deliver service and testing and written evaluations. If your district is giving you a lot of pushback about doing in-person evaluations, I would do an email in writing to the case manager requesting, of course, being respectful of your wishes for your child if they're in-person, hybrid, or full remote learning, because I would never take that away from a parent if you were doing full remote learning. But I think that, if you could get your child in there a couple of days to do some in-person testing, then you're going to get testing done with fidelity in order to write honest goals and objectives that are measurable and current. Because I don't want goals and objectives that aren't current, that aren't measurable. And I think that if you're doing that over a computer, over Zoom or Google Meets or whatever platform you want to call it loses something. It just loses that in-person, observational data that, the gut feeling that this evaluator is going to get, and they're going to write that down. And plus the behavior is different of the child in a remote versus an in-school evaluation. So again, and that's going to need to be reflected in the evaluations. I just want to say, I've always said this since the beginning of the pandemic. I think that every kid in special education, doesn't even matter what part of special education you're in, if you get, if it's just reading instruction or if it's child with multiple disabilities, autism, speech and language, doesn't matter to me. I think every single kid needs to be reassessed the moment we all go back full in person, every single one, because I think they need to be we need to see where we are and where we go from there.
They certainly do. And I'm hoping the announcement today from the U.S. Department of Education will yield some meaningful results for our children and for typical students too. It's hard to find your way if you don't know where you are.
Yeah, well, it's a start. I'll just say that with a smile on my face. I want to see more, but I'm glad it's a start. I feel hopeful about it.
One last point on remote testing. I've had several evaluators on this webinar. I've interviewed them, and they have all expressed doubts to some extent about the validity of remote testing. And every school evaluation that I've looked at since March, where remote testing was conducted, has had a disclaimer saying this evaluation was conducted during a time when remote testing was required. The results might not be valid. So this is a situation where the school people have to do the best they can, the evaluators have to do the best they can, but we all need to keep in mind that it may be less than ideal. We're going to wrap it up now. I hope you can join us for the next edition of Answers, which will be in early April. Watch your inbox for the announcement. Audra, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good luck, everyone. I know it's not easy, but just keep your head up and keep moving forward.
Yes, good luck, and we'll see you in April as the journey continues. Good night.
Good night.